Hello, and welcome to Diploma Dialogues. Today you learn everything you need to know about IB Computer Science. Like every IB subject, Computer Science has an HL and an SL. HL has three papers and an internal assessment, while SL has two papers and an internal assessment. The breakup for HL is that is 40% for paper 1, 20% for paper 2, 20% for paper 3, and 20% for your internal assessment. For SL, however, it's 45% for paper 1, 25% for paper 2, and 30% for your IA. So now what is the distinction between computer science SL and computer science HL? The main difference lies in paper 1. For SL, computer science only has four paper 1 topics, which are system fundamentals, computer organization, networks, and computational thinking. Networks includes so these are the four main topics that you learn in computer science. Networks has topics related to how you connect to the internet, the different layers of the internet, and things such as VPNs and data privacy. It's a topic that talks more about the ethics related with the internet. And then there's also computational thinking, which is pseudocode, and it's basically where you do problem solving and programming in the form of pseudocode. There's computer organization, where you learn about different parts of the computer, such as peripherals, CPU, what's included in a CPU, and etc. And then the system fundamentals, when you understand the workings of a computer. Then there's three further topics that you have to study in computer science HR. These are abstract data structures, resource management, and control systems. Abstract data structures are different types of lists or data structures, as it says, which can include a vast amount of elements. For example, linked lists, stacks, queues, double linked lists, etc. The list goes on. It's a very extensive topic. There's also resource management, where you look at memory allocation of a computer and how each the memory of a computer is divided between different tasks. Then there's control systems, where we learn about different systems, closed loop, open loop, and this is more in line with not only computers, but many different systems today which require some sort of programming for them to function properly. For example, factory systems and etc. For paper 2, there's four different options you can choose from: databases, modeling and simulation, web sciences, or object oriented programming, which is known as OOPS. OOPS is a topic where you study a programming language such as Java, or programming language which is associated with object oriented programming, and your whole paper 2 will be based on that. As for databases, it's mainly based on MySQL, and I'll look at how to compile things from databases and how to make queries, etc. Modeling and simulation is more complicated than these two, because it requires a lot more thought process and a lot more creativity. Whilst web science looks more about how websites and how people use websites, and essentially it asks a lot of questions about safety over the internet. So for both HL and SL, you have to choose one of these four topics, and that is the one paper that that is the one option that you'll be stuck with for the rest of the year. So whenever you take a paper 2, you'd have to whichever topics you've chosen from databases, modeling and simulation, web science, or object or oriented programming, all of your paper 2 papers will then on be based on that option. Then going to HL, that is the paper 3. So this is basically based on real life examples. You will be given a case study, and then you have to answer questions based on the entire case study. One paper 3 only has one case study, and uh, your entire 30 mark paper 3 will be based on that singular case study. For example, if it's a case study on rescue robots, the entirety of paper 3 will be based on rescue robots. There will be no other topic involved. Now let's move on to the internal assessment. The internal assessment is the most rigorous part of computer science, in my opinion. It's the most difficult and challenging thing that I've had to do in school. If you've already done IB in a past year, or you know about the design cycle, you'll know that the internal assessment follows the same process, except there's one extra criteria. So there's criteria A, B, C, D, and E. Criteria A is 6 marks, criteria B is 6 marks, criteria C is 12 marks, criteria D is 4 marks, and criteria E is 6 marks. The entirety coming up to 34 marks. So, like the design cycle mainly follows the same process, except the grading is much harsher and there's a lot more details that you need to include. Let's start with criteria A. So criteria A is your planning stage, and this actually has less than a design cycle, since what it requires you to do is to have an interview with your client, and basically it needs you to designate the problem and what solution you'll be going towards it, and then you also need to give a rationale as to what you're doing for this product or why you're doing it and how you're going to do it. The entirety of this can only there's a total word count of 500 words, and then you also need to include a success criteria in this. It's a very straightforward criteria A, and but criteria B is much more challenging. So similarly to your design cycle, criteria B is the development stage or the planning stage. So in this, what happens, you have to create a lot of diagrams and basically figure out how you're going to do what you're going to make. For example, you need to create system flowcharts based on your product and what your product is going to entail. If you're creating a website, or if any product that you make, you need to create prototypes, and you also need to create mock sketches of what it's going to look like, what you want to do, and everything has to be annotated. It's recommended that you also have an ER diagram, which is an entity relationship diagram, to show how everything interacts with one another. Additionally, if you're using a database or if you have an authentication system, you need to include what all things will be in that database and what sort of data will be stored. Criteria B is split into two parts. The first will be the designing, and the second is your record of tasks. Your record of tasks is updated constantly, and it must include everything that you've done in a proper organized manner and in the proper timeline. And by everything, I mean literally everything. From your first interview to your client, from what you did the next day and the next day and the next day. Keep updating it. Don't leave your record of tasks to the last minute. So if whenever you work on on a CSIA and you finish your work for that day, update your record of tasks. Otherwise, you're gonna forget, and then you get lower marks on criteria B. Then there's criteria C, which is the most challenging part of your CSIA. Criteria C is 12 marks, and it's also the largest part of your CSIA. It has the most marks, so that naturally makes it the most rigorous part, as it's hard to get marks in criteria C. And that's because criteria C, when they want to give you higher marks, they base it on how complex or challenging the program you have to make is. If your product that you're creating is too simple or you haven't explained it well enough, the maximum marks you'll be able to amount will be 4. And that is no joke. Criteria C is extremely challenging. If you want to have a good criteria C, make sure you have a thorough and very good product that has a lot of different elements that are to be explained. In criteria C, what you need to do is not solely just create the product. You also need to document different important aspects of the product. For example, if you have an authentication system or a database, which is very important for your product, it requires some vital client information. You need to properly explain that in your documentation. Your entire documentation is has a total maximum amount of 1,000 words. It cannot be above that. What makes a document so challenging is that you have to concisely explain everything, but it also has to be in detail. If you want to have a good product, naturally you'd have a lot of things that you wish to explain to get higher marks in criteria C. But because of this word limit, it makes it a bit challenging to choose what to explain and how much to explain for that separate part of your program. Now, if you done so next is criteria D, and this is the change that comes from between your regular design cycle and your computer science IA. So after you create your success criteria, you need to evaluate your success criteria. Usually in the design cycle, you do that from a series of tests, but there's no real evidence. What criteria D entails is that you have to take a video of you using your product with your success criteria, and show how your product fulfills all those different success criteria. You have to show how your product fulfills all those different success criteria. It's recommended that while you're screen recording your product, you have your table or your success criteria on the same screen, just a bit to the side, so that people who are watching the video see what you're evaluating and they don't simply have to listen to you explain. The video has to be from 5 to 7 minutes, and you have to explain your entire product and as well as how it fulfills the success criteria. You can also explain what differences you would have made to the product and how you would have taken it further. Next is criteria E. So this again is your evaluation. There's three different ways you need to evaluate your product. You need to do a self-evaluation, a peer evaluation, which is basically taking an interview of someone in your class and make them use the product to see what they can improve as in the form of a program, or what functional aspects they could improve. And then the most important one is your interview, and it's basically how well the product fulfills the desires of the client. You need to evaluate your success criteria based on these three different parameters, and then you also need to have maximum of 500 words based on how you can take this product further and what all you could improve in this product. Some things to keep in mind for your CSI is that document everything. Like I said earlier, record of tasks is very important. Document everything you've done. And the second part I'd like to point out is your appendix. Every criteria except for criteria D needs an appendix. They need some sort of your teacher will need some sort of evidence that you have contacted your client and you've done some research with your client, or you've interacted with your client. For criteria A, you'd have your first interview, what problem the client wants you to solve, and then you discuss how you'd solve it. In criteria B, you'd show them your design and see how well it fits the client's needs, or what all things you could add to it, and constantly update your design. For criteria C, you don't necessarily need to have an interview with the client, but you need to include all of your scripts. All of your different code will go in your appendix for criteria C, so that when you're explaining parts of your code, your teacher will refer to your appendix C for that part of the code. If your code is not in your appendix, the teacher cannot give you marks because they don't know what you are explaining. And then you don't need an appendix for criteria D because that is you explaining your product. And then there's criteria E, when you need to have two different interviews, one with a peer and one with a client, and then discuss how you take it further with both of them. That is all for CS. Thank you.